The massive chamber on Centauri Prime had never seen such chaos. Representatives from 47 different worlds filled the circular hall, their voices creating a symphony of panic that echoed off the crystal walls. Ambassador Kextar stood at the center platform, his forearms shaking as he tried to maintain order. Silence. Kextar's voice boomed through the translation devices. We must act quickly, or there will be no galaxy left to save. The holographic display above the platform showed the grim truth. 3 red zones marked systems that had gone completely dark in the past month. The Zephyrian Collective had awakened after 1,000 years of silence, and they were consuming everything in their path. Admiral Vexra of the Astari Crystal Fleet stood up, her crystalline body catching the chamber's light. Our most advanced weapons cannot even scratch their ships. They adapt to every strategy within minutes. My entire battle group was destroyed before we could fire a second volley. Murmurs of fear rippled through the assembly. The Astari had the most powerful fleet in the known galaxy. If they could not stop the collective, what hope did anyone have? What about the Rillan war machines? Asked a voice from the back. General Thoxon of the Rillan Federation slowly stood, his massive frame dwarfing the other delegates. We sent our greatest warriors. The collective absorbed their consciousness and turned them against us. They now fight with our own tactics, but perfectly executed. The chamber fell silent. The Rillans had been warriors for 10,000 years. Their defeat meant the traditional ways of war were useless. Kextar looked around the room desperately. There must be something we have not tried. Some species we have overlooked. An elderly being from the outer rim raised a tentacled appendage. What about the humans? Laughter erupted from several delegates. The idea seemed absurd to most of them. Humans. Admiral Vexra's voice carried clear disdain. Those primitive mammals from the death world? They barely have faster-than-light travel. Their world is indeed harsh, the Outer Rim delegate continued. Perhaps that gives them advantages we do not possess. Kextar considered this. Earth had been discovered only 50 years ago. The humans were violent, unpredictable, and lived on a world that would kill most galactic species within hours. Most civilized beings considered them barely above animals. They have no real military to speak of. General Thoxon rumbled. What could they possibly do that we cannot? Maybe that is exactly what we need, Kextar said slowly. Something the collective has never encountered before. Meanwhile, 3,000 light-years away, Commander Jake Morrison sat in his office at Luna Base, Earth's primary military facility. The communication from the Galactic Council had arrived that morning, and he was still trying to process the message. Lieutenant Amy Foster knocked on his door and entered without waiting for permission. Sir, the translation software has finished working on that alien message. Morrison looked up from his coffee. And? They want our help, sir. Something about an enemy that's destroying entire star systems. Amy handed him the datapad. They're calling it the Zephyrian Collective. Morrison read through the file, his expression growing more serious with each line. The descriptions of the enemy's capabilities seemed impossible. Ships that could adapt to any weapon in minutes. A hive mind that could process millions of strategies simultaneously. Technology that converted matter itself into more of their collective. Why us? Morrison asked. We're still figuring out how to make our own hyperspace engines work properly. Amy shrugged. The message says something about our unique evolutionary background and unpredictable nature. Honestly, sir, it sounds like they're desperate. Morrison stood and walked to the window overlooking Earth's scarred surface. The planet bore the marks of countless wars, natural disasters, and the struggle for survival that had shaped humanity for millions of years. Maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Get me Captain Steve Bradley, Morrison ordered, and prepare the Defiance for immediate deployment. Captain Bradley arrived within an hour, his weathered face showing the strain of recent combat exercises. He had spent 20 years fighting in Earth's various conflicts before joining the space program. Jake, what's this about aliens needing our help? Bradley asked, settling into a chair. Morrison explained the situation, watching Bradley's expression change from skepticism to grim determination. So let me understand this, Bradley said. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy can't stop this enemy, but they think we can. That's about right. Bradley was quiet for a long moment. How many people are we talking about saving? Morrison consulted his notes. Conservative estimates put the total population of the affected regions at over 200 billion beings. 200 billion. Bradley repeated the number softly. And if we don't help, the collective will eventually reach Earth anyway. This way we at least have allies. Bradley nodded slowly. I'll need my best crew. How long do we have to prepare? The Council is sending coordinates for a rendezvous point. We can reach it in 3 weeks if we leave tomorrow. As Bradley left to prepare his ship, Morrison contacted Earth's government leaders. The conversation was brief and decisive. Humanity had never backed down from a fight even when the odds were impossible. The next morning, the UES Defiance lifted off from Earth's surface. Captain Bradley's crew of 200 represented the best humanity had to offer. They were soldiers, scientists, engineers, and pilots who had survived Earth's harsh environment and emerged stronger. As Earth fell away behind them, Bradley addressed his crew over the ship's communication system. We're heading into the unknown to face an enemy that has defeated every military force it has encountered. The aliens think we might have something they don't. I'm not sure what that is, but I know one thing for certain. He paused, looking out at the stars ahead. We're human. We've survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have wiped out most species. We've climbed the highest mountains and dove to the deepest oceans. We've split the atom and walked on other worlds. Whatever is waiting for us out there, we'll find a way to fight it. The crew's response was a roar of approval that echoed through the ship's corridors. 3 weeks later, the Defiance emerged from hyperspace at the coordinates provided by the Galactic Council. What they saw changed everything they thought they knew about war, survival, and what it truly meant to be human. The Kepler 442 system looked like a nightmare made real. Captain Bradley stared at the main screen of the Defiance, trying to understand what he was seeing. Where there should have been planets, geometric patterns of crystal and metal floated in perfect formations. The structures pulsed with an eerie blue light that made his skin crawl. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Commander Lisa Parker from her position at the sensor station. "Those used to be worlds." The tactical display showed the remains of the Reelan defense fleet scattered throughout the system. Twisted metal and crystalline fragments drifted in the void, all that remained of what had once been the galaxy's most powerful military force. "Captain," called Chief Communications Officer Danny Brooks from his station, "I'm picking up a transmission from the outer system. It's Admiral Thrak of the surviving Reelan forces. The image that appeared on screen showed a being that looked nothing like the proud warrior they had met on Centauri Prime. Admiral, Thrak's armor was cracked, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and defeat. Human vessel, you should not have come here. This system is lost. The collective has turned 3 worlds into processing centers. Everything organic has been absorbed." Bradley stepped forward. "Admiral, we're here to help. What can you tell us about the enemy's capabilities?" Thrak's laugh was bitter. "Help? We brought 12 battle fleets to this system. Ships that had never known defeat. The collective studied us for exactly 17 minutes, then countered every tactic we had developed over 10,000 years of warfare." "How do they adapt so quickly?" asked Lisa. "They share a single consciousness across billions of individual units. When one learns, they all learn. When we destroyed their scouts, the knowledge of our weapons was instantly transmitted to every ship in their fleet." Bradley studied the tactical display. "What about their command structure? There has to be some kind of central control. If there is, we never found it. They operate like a single organism with billions of bodies. Cut off one part, and the rest adapts to compensate." The conversation was interrupted by alarms throughout the ship. Lisa's voice was tight with tension as she reported, "Captain, I'm detecting movement from the inner system. Multiple contacts heading our way." On the screen, dark shapes emerged from behind one of the crystalline processing stations. The ships were unlike anything in the human databases. They flowed, rather than flew, changing shape as they moved through space. "All vessels, retreat immediately." Admiral Thrak's voice crackled over the communication system. "You cannot fight them." "No one can." Bradley watched the enemy ships approach. There were 12 of them, each one different from the others. They moved with purpose, but also with an alien grace that suggested intelligence far beyond human understanding. "Lisa, I need a volunteer for a reconnaissance mission, someone willing to get close and gather intelligence." Before Lisa could respond, Sergeant Ryan Cooper's voice came over the internal communication system. "I'll do it, Captain. My fighter is fast and small. I can get in close before they know I'm there." Bradley hesitated. Cooper was one of their best pilots, but this was essentially a suicide mission. "Ryan, you understand the risks?" "Yes, sir. But someone needs to get a close look at these things." If I don't make it back, at least you'll have the data. 5 minutes later, Cooper's fighter launched from the Defiance's bay. Bradley watched on the tactical display as the small craft streaked toward the approaching enemy formation. Cooper, what are you seeing out there? Lisa's voice carried over the communication channel. These ships are incredible. Cooper's voice was filled with a mixture of awe and fear. They're changing configuration every few seconds. It's like they're testing different forms to see what works best. The enemy formation suddenly shifted, converging on Cooper's position with frightening speed. But instead of fleeing in a straight line as any logical pilot would do, Cooper did something completely unexpected. He began flying in random patterns, rolling and diving with no apparent purpose. The enemy ships, which had been moving to intercept him, suddenly slowed and began spreading out in confusion. What are they doing? Lisa asked. I don't think they know how to respond to me, Cooper replied, his voice excited despite the danger. I'm flying like a complete madman and their formation is falling apart. Cooper continued his erratic flight pattern, weaving between the enemy ships while his fighter's sensors recorded everything. The collective vessels tried to adapt to his movements, but every time they predicted his next turn, he did something completely different. Cooper, get out of there, Bradley ordered. You've done enough. Just a few more seconds, Captain. I want to plant some tracking beacons on their hulls. What Cooper did next would be talked about in military academies for generations. Instead of trying to outrun the enemy, he flew directly at the largest ship, spinning wildly and firing his weapons in every direction except at his target. The collective ship, expecting a logical attack pattern, had positioned its defenses to counter a standard assault. Cooper's chaotic approach caught them completely off guard. He managed to attach 3 tracking devices to the ship's hull before breaking away. The enemy formation, now completely confused by the human pilot's irrational behavior, began firing at each other as they tried to predict where Cooper would go next. In the chaos, Cooper's fighter escaped back to the Defiance. As the human ship jumped to hyperspace, Bradley gathered his senior officers in the briefing room. Cooper sat at the table, still shaking from adrenaline. What you did out there was either brilliant or insane, Bradley told him. Cooper grinned. Maybe both, sir. But it worked. These things expect logical behavior. When you act completely random, they don't know how to respond. Lisa was studying the sensor data from Cooper's mission. Captain, this is incredible. The enemy ships were adapting to projected flight paths. But when Ryan started flying erratically, their response time increased by over 300%. It makes sense, said Dr. Helen Martinez, the ship's chief scientist. If they share a collective consciousness, they probably process information in highly logical patterns. Chaos would be difficult for them to understand or predict. Bradley looked around the table at his officers. For the first time since arriving in the system, he felt something other than despair. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we may have found humanity's advantage in this war. Every other species in the galaxy fights with logic and strategy. But humans? We're the galaxy's chaos agents. Word of the successful intelligence gathering spread quickly through the surviving fleet. For the first time in months, there was hope that the collective could be fought. News of humanity's success against the collective spread through the surviving galactic fleets like wildfire. Within days, Commander Morrison found himself overwhelmed with requests from species he had never heard of, all asking for human tactical advisors. Major Tyler Johnson stood before a gathering of alien military commanders in the briefing room of the Astari command ship. The crystalline beings around the table stared at him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to complete bewilderment. You want us to ignore our battle computers? Admiral Vexra's voice carried clear disbelief. We have spent millennia perfecting our tactical algorithms. Tyler nodded patiently. That's exactly the problem, Admiral. Your computers are predictable. The collective can analyze your patterns and counter them within minutes. But if you fight with instinct and emotion, they can't predict what you'll do next. A Rillan general named Kothron leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across the table. Humans fight with emotion? This sounds like madness. Maybe it is, Tyler replied with a grin, but it's the kind of madness that works against an enemy that thinks in pure logic. Meanwhile, Captain Bradley was leading strike teams in guerrilla attacks throughout the Outer Rim systems. The collective had established supply lines stretching across dozens of star systems, and the humans were systematically disrupting them. The latest target was a processing station in the Vega system. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Parker reviewed the tactical data with a growing sense of unease. "Captain, this doesn't make any sense," she said, pointing to the battle plan on the screen. "You want to attack their strongest defensive position while ignoring the obvious weak points in their perimeter?" Bradley smiled. "Exactly. What would you do if you were defending that station?" "I'd put my strongest defenses around the weak points and minimal coverage on the heavily defended areas, because no sane commander would attack there." "Right. So we attack where they least expect us." The assault on the Vega processing station became a textbook example of human tactical thinking. Instead of the logical approach of finding and exploiting weaknesses, the human forces attacked the enemy's greatest strength head-on. Corporal Danny Brooks led his squad of Marines in what appeared to be a suicide charge against the station's main defensive array. The collective had positioned their most powerful weapons to cover the obvious approach routes, but they had not expected anyone to be crazy enough to attack directly through their heaviest firepower. "This is insane," shouted Private Kelly Rogers as plasma bolts exploded around their landing craft. "Stay focused," Brooks yelled back. "They think we're going to turn away or find cover. When we don't, their whole defensive plan falls apart." Brooks was right. The collective's automated defense systems had been programmed to respond to logical assault patterns. When the humans continued their seemingly suicidal attack, the systems began overcompensating, creating gaps in their coverage. The Marines fought their way through the station's corridors with a combination of training and pure stubbornness that left the collective forces struggling to adapt. Every time the enemy tried to predict human behavior, the Marines did something completely unexpected. The success at Vega proved that human tactics could work on a larger scale, but it also attracted unwanted attention. Deep within collective space, the central intelligence that controlled billions of individual units began focusing its vast processing power on understanding these new enemies. Back on Earth, Admiral Morrison was coordinating the planet's defense preparations when urgent communications began flooding in from across the galaxy. The collective had dispatched a massive tendril of their force toward Earth, intent on eliminating the source of unpredictability before it could spread further. "How long do we have?" Morrison asked his tactical staff. "Based on their current speed, approximately 3 weeks before they reach the outer system," replied Colonel Kate Russell. Morrison looked at the strategic display showing Earth's defenses. They had advanced significantly in recent months, but they were still no match for a full collective assault force. "We can't fight them conventionally," Morrison said, "but maybe we don't have to." The plan that emerged was typically human in its apparent madness. Instead of setting up defensive positions around Earth, Morrison ordered the entire defense fleet to spread throughout the solar system in seemingly random positions. When Captain Bradley returned from his latest mission, he found Earth's military in chaos. Ships were positioned in asteroid fields hiding behind moons and scattered across the system with no apparent coordination. "Jake, what are you doing?" Bradley asked during their briefing. "This looks like complete disorder." "That's the point," Morrison replied. "Every other species in the galaxy has tried to fight the collective with organized formations and coordinated strategies. We're going to fight them with pure chaos." The human defense plan relied on individual ship commanders making their own decisions without central coordination. Each captain was given basic objectives but told to use their own judgment on how to achieve them. Lieutenant Colonel Chris Hamilton commanded one of the squadrons positioned near Mars. His orders were simple: harass the enemy and cause as much confusion as possible. "Sir, shouldn't we coordinate with the other squadrons?" asked his tactical officer. "Negative," Hamilton replied. "We act independently. The moment we start coordinating, we become predictable." When the collective force finally arrived in the solar system, they encountered something unprecedented in their billion-year history. Instead of organized resistance, they faced what appeared to be complete military chaos. Human ships attacked from unexpected angles, used damaged vessels as improvised weapons, and fought with a desperate intensity that defied logical explanation. Captains made split-second decisions that violated every principle of military strategy, yet somehow achieved their objectives. The battle for Earth lasted 6 days. The collective adapted to every tactic they encountered, but the humans kept changing their approach. No two engagements were alike, and no pattern could be predicted. On the sixth day, something unexpected happened. The collective forces, overwhelmed by the constant unpredictability, began withdrawing from the system. For the first time in their existence, they had encountered an enemy they could not understand or counter. As the last collective ships disappeared into hyperspace, Earth's defenders gathered to assess their victory. They had lost nearly 40% of their fleet, but they had achieved something no other species had managed. They had forced the collective to retreat. "How did we do it?" asked Captain Bradley during the post-battle briefing. Admiral Morrison looked at the tactical reports scattered across the table. "We fought like humans. We refused to be logical when logic said we should lose. We adapted faster than they could process our adaptations. Most importantly, we never gave up." The victory at Earth sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. For the first time since the war began, civilized species had hoped that the collective could be defeated. The war was changing, and both sides were evolving with it. Deep within collective space, billions of crystalline minds worked together to solve the human problem. They had never encountered beings that could think so chaotically, and their perfect logical systems were struggling to adapt. Admiral Morrison walked through the corridors of the newly established Deathworld Training Corps on Luna base. The facility buzzed with activity as beings from dozens of species learned to fight like humans. "The key is to stop thinking," Major Tyler Johnson explained to a group of Astari warriors. "When you see an enemy ship, don't calculate the best angle of attack. Just pick one and go with it." The crystalline beings struggled with the concept. Their entire civilization was built on precise calculations and logical thought processes. Admiral Vexra raised one of her crystalline appendages. "But if we do not calculate, how do we ensure success?" "You don't," Tyler replied simply. "That's the whole point. If you can't guarantee success, then the enemy can't predict your failure." Across the room, General Kothran of the Rillan Federation was having better luck with the concept. His species had been warriors for thousands of years, and their multiple arms made them naturally adaptable to chaotic fighting styles. "I think I understand," Kothran rumbled. "We must fight with our hearts instead of our minds." "Now you're getting it," Tyler said with approval. Captain Bradley was leading humanity's most ambitious operation yet. Operation Madness called for simultaneous attacks on 17 collective strongholds, using completely nonsensical battle plans. Each strike force was led by a human commander with orders to ignore all tactical advice and follow their instincts. The planning session had been unlike anything in military history. Instead of detailed strategies, commanders were told to do whatever feels right and make it up as you go along. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Parker commanded one of the strike forces targeting a processing station in the Alpha Centauri system. As her ships approached the target, she threw out everything she had learned in military academy. "All ships. Attack pattern random," she ordered over the communication channel. "Ma'am, what's attack pattern random?" asked her tactical officer. "I have no idea," Lisa replied. "Just pick a direction and start shooting." The assault on Alpha Centauri was typical of Operation Madness. Human ships attacked from impossible angles, used debris as cover, and coordinated their efforts through shouted orders rather than tactical computers. Captain Steve Turner led the assault on the Proxima Station, one of the collective's largest processing centers. His approach was so illogical that his own tactical computer refused to calculate success probabilities. "Computer says this plan has a 0% chance of working," reported his navigation officer. "Perfect," Turner replied. "That means the enemy won't see it coming either." The results of Operation Madness exceeded everyone's expectations except possibly the humans who planned it. 16 of the 17 targeted facilities were either destroyed or severely damaged. The collective forces, prepared for logical assaults, were completely overwhelmed by the chaotic attacks. But victory came at a terrible cost. Humanity lost 60% of their space-capable military in the coordinated assault. Captain Bradley's ship, the Defiance, was among the casualties, destroyed while covering the retreat from the Vega system. Admiral Morrison stood in the Memorial Hall on Luna Base, looking at the names of the fallen. Each name represented someone who had chosen to fight an impossible enemy because it was the right thing to do. Lieutenant Colonel Kate Russell approached with a datapad in her hands. Her expression was grim. "Admiral, you need to see this. We managed to decode some of the collective communication traffic from Operation Madness. Morrison took the datapad and read the translation. What he saw made his blood run cold. "They're learning," he said quietly. "Yes, sir. The collective has started incorporating randomness generators into their tactical systems. They're trying to match our unpredictability with artificial chaos." Morrison studied the intelligence reports. The enemy's new approach combined their rapid adaptation capabilities with unpredictable behavior patterns. It was the worst of both worlds. How long before they perfect this new strategy? Our analysts estimate 6 months, maybe less. Morrison looked back at the memorial wall. So many had died to give the galaxy a chance, but the enemy was adapting once again. Soon, humanity's advantage would be gone. Meanwhile, in the outer rim systems, reports were coming in of a new type of collective ship. These vessels moved erratically, attacked without apparent coordination, and seemed to ignore logical targeting priorities. Commander Sarah Blake encountered one of these new ships while escorting a refugee convoy through the Kepler system. The enemy vessel approached using standard attack patterns, then suddenly began flying in completely random directions. "What is it doing?" asked her tactical officer. "Copying us," Sarah replied grimly. "It's trying to fight like a human." The battle lasted 3 hours and ended with both ships heavily damaged. For the first time in the war, a collective vessel had fought to a standstill with a human commander. Back on Earth, Dr. Helen Martinez was analyzing the combat data from these encounters. Her conclusions were disturbing. "They're not just copying our tactics," she explained to Morrison's staff. "They're learning to think irrationally. Their artificial intelligence systems are being modified to include emotional response patterns." "Can they actually become unpredictable?" asked Colonel Russell. "They're trying to, but there's something they can't replicate." "What's that?" Dr. Martinez pulled up a psychological profile on her screen. "They can copy chaos, but they can't copy passion. They can simulate randomness, but they can't simulate the human willingness to sacrifice everything for others." Morrison looked at the data thoughtfully. "So we still have an advantage?" "For now. But if they learn to simulate human emotion as well as they've learned to simulate human tactics, we could be in serious trouble." The situation became critical when long-range scouts reported massive collective fleet movements toward the core systems. The enemy was abandoning their expansion efforts and consolidating their forces for a final offensive. "They're going to hit every major populated system simultaneously," reported Admiral Vexra during a joint command meeting. "Our combined fleets cannot defend against an assault of this magnitude." Morrison studied the tactical projections. The enemy's new hybrid strategy made them nearly unbeatable. They had retained their rapid adaptation while becoming impossible to predict or outmaneuver. "There's only one option left," Morrison said quietly. "We go after their source." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what he meant. The collective's central node. The original homeworld where their hive mind had first emerged billions of years ago. "That's suicide," Admiral Vexra stated flatly. "No ship has ever penetrated that deep into collective space and returned." "Then we'll have to be the first," Morrison replied. "Because if we don't try, there won't be a galaxy left to save." The plan that emerged was beyond desperate. It required flying through the heart of collective space, past countless defensive installations, to reach a target that might not even be vulnerable to conventional weapons. Every tactical computer in the galaxy calculated the mission's success. Probability is effectively zero, but as Morrison would later write in his personal log, sometimes the most human thing to do was to attempt the impossible. The combined fleet that gathered at the edge of collective space was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships from 40 different worlds flew alongside human vessels, their crews trained in the chaotic fighting style that had become known as Death World tactics. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Liberty, looking out at the assembled fleet. 200 ships represented everything the galaxy could spare for this final mission. It was not nearly enough. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Astari command ship," reported Communications Officer Danny Brooks. Admiral Vexra's crystalline form appeared on the main screen. "Admiral Morrison, my tactical computers are refusing to calculate odds for this mission. They keep displaying error messages." Morrison managed a grim smile. "Good. That means we're thinking like humans." The plan was simple in concept but terrifying in execution. The fleet would punch through the collective's outer defenses using pure aggression and speed. Once they reached the inner systems, A small strike team would assault the central node while the main fleet engaged every collective ship in the galaxy. Captain Nancy Turner commanded the newly commissioned UES Redemption. Built from the salvaged remains of Bradley's old ship, she had volunteered to lead the most dangerous part of the mission, the direct assault on the collective homeworld. "Are you sure about this, Nancy?" Morrison asked during their final briefing. Turner looked at the tactical display showing the impossible journey ahead. "Steve Bradley died getting us this far. I'm not going to let his sacrifice be meaningless." Sergeant Major Chris Hamilton led the ground assault team, composed of volunteers from a dozen different species who had learned to fight like Deathworlders. Their mission was to penetrate the crystalline tunnels of the collective homeworld and plant a quantum destabilizer in the central consciousness. "Remember," Hamilton told his team, "we're not trying to be tactical or smart. We're trying to be human. When in doubt, charge forward and figure it out as you go." The assault began at 0800 hours Galactic Standard Time. The combined fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of collective territory and immediately began their desperate charge toward the core systems. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of collective ships converged on the attacking fleet from every direction, but instead of meeting them with organized formations, the Galactic Alliance attacked in complete chaos. Human commanders led mixed squadrons of alien ships in tactics that defied every principle of space combat. They used asteroid fields as weapons, turned damaged ships into missiles, and coordinated through shouted orders rather than tactical networks. Admiral Vexra found herself screaming battle cries in a language she had never learned as her crystal ships dove through collective formations with reckless abandon. The logical part of her mind was horrified, but another part, a part she had never known existed, was exhilarated. General Cothron led a squadron of Rillan heavy cruisers in what he later described as the most beautiful madness he had ever experienced. His ships moved like dancers, weaving between enemy fire with a grace that came from instinct rather than calculation. The battle raged across 17 star systems as the Alliance fleet fought its way toward the collective homeworld. Ships were lost by the dozen, but the survivors pressed on with a determination that amazed even the humans. Captain Turner's assault force reached the homeworld after 36 hours of continuous fighting. The planet was a crystalline sphere covered in geometric patterns that pulsed with malevolent energy. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "All right, people," Turner announced over the communication channel. "This is it. Hamilton's team goes down to the surface. Everyone else, we keep the sky clear for as long as possible." The ground assault was unlike anything in military history. Hamilton's team fought through tunnels that rearranged themselves to stop intruders, faced defenders that adapted their tactics in real time, and navigated a maze that existed in more dimensions than human minds could properly understand. "The central node should be just ahead," reported Dr. Martinez, who had volunteered to join the ground team despite having no combat training. They emerged into a vast chamber filled with swirling energy patterns. At the center, a massive crystalline structure pulsed with the combined consciousness of billions of individual collective units. "Plant the device and get out," Hamilton ordered his team. But as they approached the central node, the entire chamber began to shift and change. The collective was adapting one final time, reconfiguring its most precious asset to prevent its destruction. Above the planet, Captain Turner watched her fleet being systematically destroyed by overwhelming numbers of enemy ships. The Liberty and Redemption were the last two vessels still fighting, and both were taking heavy damage. "Admiral, we can't hold them much longer," Turner reported. Morrison looked at his tactical display. Hamilton's team was still inside the central node, racing against time to complete their mission. They needed just a few more minutes. "Nancy, take the Redemption and get out of here." "That's an order." "Sir, I'm not leaving you." "You're not leaving me," Morrison replied. "You're completing the mission." Morrison ordered the Liberty into a collision course with the largest collective ship. The massive vessel, designed to counter logical attack patterns, could not comprehend what appeared to be a deliberate act of self-destruction. The Liberty's sacrifice created an opening in the enemy formation, allowing the Redemption to cover the evacuation of Hamilton's team. As the ground assault team lifted off from the planet's surface, the quantum destabilizer activated. The explosion was not visible to the naked eye, but its effects were immediate. The collective's central consciousness, the hive mind that had controlled billions of individual units for eons, began to collapse. Across the galaxy, collective ships suddenly stopped moving in coordination. Individual units, freed from the hive mind's control, began questioning their purpose. Many simply powered down their weapons and drifted in space, experiencing individual consciousness for the first time in their existence. The war was over. In the years that followed, the galaxy began to rebuild. The species that had been absorbed by the collective were freed and helped to restore their devastated worlds. Many chose to establish relations with Earth, eager to learn more about the Death World tactics that had saved them. The Death World Academy became a permanent institution, training warriors from across the galaxy in the art of fighting with heart over logic. Students learned that sometimes the most intelligent thing to do was to abandon intelligence entirely. Admiral Morrison's final log entry, recorded shortly before his retirement, became required reading at military academies throughout the known galaxy. We did not win because we were smarter or stronger than our enemies. We won because when faced with extinction, humans do not calculate odds or surrender to inevitability. We make our own luck, create our own hope, and refuse to accept defeat even when victory seems impossible. That more than any weapon or strategy is humanity's gift to the galaxy. Lieutenant Colonel Kate Russell, now promoted to Admiral and Director of the Death World Academy, often ended her lectures with a simple reminder to her alien students: logic is a tool, courage is a weapon, but the willingness to sacrifice everything for others, that is the power that can change the universe. The galaxy had learned that sometimes salvation comes not from the most advanced civilizations, but from the ones that refuse to give up hope when hope seems lost. Humanity had proven that being a little crazy, a little unpredictable, and a little too stubborn to quit could be the greatest strengths of all.